uh, occupation and sieges for anybody, no matter who they are.
Are you not concerned about the binary between either condemning Israel entirely, being like also a stance that a lot of like very strong and notorious anti-Semitic people agree with, versus like, you know, seeing this as more of a complex issue where it is wrong what's going on and that there's also a way to do this that Israel still exists and is supported?
So,
Or is
so it's not a complex issue. That's the big thing. It's super simple. There's one group that has enormous power. It's the most powerful country in the Middle East. It's backed by the United States. It acts on another population of people with total impunity and is never held accountable for anything. So there's no symmetry in the relationship, period. And just as like a thought experiment, IDW people, if we know that if somehow a population of Jewish refugees ended up in West Bank and Gaza, and an Arabic government in Jerusalem and Tel Aviv had an open air prison in what, Jewish Gaza, which they bombed with white phosphorus, they killed civilians indiscriminately, and they had no provisions for medicine. They had an embargo that blocked food, that electricity wasn't running, that there was an over 48% unemployment rate, life expectancy and malnutrition statistics were horrifying. One of the major policymakers in this hypothetical Arabic Palestinian state said, we need to put those Jews on a diet. In the West Bank, there was another Jewish area where there was a little bit more autonomy, but there was regular Arabic settlements where they pulled up the Jewish farmers' foods, they terrorized them with rocks, the security forces broke children's bones, and they couldn't drive their own roads. We'd all have no problem understanding what that was. So there's nothing complex about it. The second part of your question, it's a pure asymmetry relationship. And the question is rights or not. So that's it. It's not complicated. The second part of your question, at this point, there's always going to be crackpots who are anti-Semitic who condemn Israel. That's not what drives the movement, particularly in the United States. If you work around most people who are concerned with this issue, it's actually populated with a lot of Jewish people. The real question we have to ask is, why is it that AIPAC is hosting an information minister for Slobodan Milosevic? Why is it that there's relationships between the Israeli government and far-right parties in Europe? Why is it that Benjamin Netanyahu's son is posting borderline alt-right memes? Why is it that Israel is an alt-right state, even though it is from the descendants of the victims of one of the greatest crimes in history? That's a serious question, and that's inseparable from the racism of the project, which goes back to the first part that we have to solve. But thank you. Shalom.
Well, what's up, YouTube? We are back with another episode of Comrade's Corner. I am here with my guys, Nick from across the pond, and Alex. What's up, bros? How you doing? Alex, if you could just unmute yourself real quick. I think you just muted yourself by accident. But how you guys doing? What's up, fellas?
What's up, y'all? How you doing? How you guys doing? It's been a while. I miss you guys.
Miss you more, bro. Miss you more, bro. It's been quite a while. We've been doing our things. You, myself, you, Alex, you're in school, killing it with the books. Nick, he's over there with his intellectual thing, but he's grading papers, doing his thing. Nick does several. He has several jobs. He has more jobs than anyone that I can count on one hand. And myself, I just started a new job, which I fell off of a ladder this past week, so I have some days off. So it was good, guys.
What's up, man?
I'm excited to be back here. The time through has been interesting because we've seen like the world has moved on. Like the world hasn't waited for us to come back. It's kept going, and we've seen this Delta variant really take off. And I'm suffering in lockdown again here in Australia, with this Delta variant running wild, and then we've got the Lambda variant on the horizon. So, it's what do you call it? Like coming home to roost. The chickens have come home to roost for a number of things that were sort of said how many years ago, like a year and a half ago. I can still vividly remember in my mind that protest. It was in Michigan at the State House, not where they tried to kidnap Gretchen. What's her name? Gretchen. bit more, yeah. But the earlier one where they're like, "I want a haircut,"
Yeah.
that protest, and now 18 months later, it's like, what's your haircut worth when nearly
My
three
bad.
quarters of a million people are dead, and yet over the weekend here in Australia, and of course, over the weekend's over now for us because I'm ahead of you. I'm in the future. Done in the
Oh.
past, but over the weekend we had this massive protest movement of thousands of people not wearing masks, not social distancing, screaming their heads off, saying we want freedom, and the kind of the take that people have had is it's like in high school when the teacher's like, all right, everyone sit still for 1 minute, otherwise I'm not letting you out to lunch. And you got that one kid who doesn't care, who's, still got the spitball going, and
Hmm.
it's just racking up the minutes for everybody else. And that's kind of where we're at. So it's been tough. Lockdown is tough mentally, emotionally, and of course financially. And, but it's also given me an opportunity to think about what I want to contribute to this show. And of course, today we're going to be talking about our collective hero, Michael Brooks, and
Hmm.
I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah, yeah, most definitely, especially this past past couple weeks, just the build up to like the anniversary of his passing, and the work that people have been doing just to contribute to keeping his name and keeping his work going. You know, Nick, you get into, if you want, you could get into it later on, like what you have been contributing to that. Alex, I know Alex and I, we met because of that. Like, we met on Instagram. Nick as well. We all met on Instagram. We never knew each other ever a day in each other's like IRL in real life, but in I feel like I know you guys more than I know some of my family members and some of my close friends, and I genuinely mean that. So,
Oh,
I know we have no, honestly, Alex, and I know we had
that's
different
cool.
conversations throughout the weeks. And Nick, I have conversations frequently with you, and when I tell you guys, I love you guys, I actually mean it. I want to see you guys doing well and being able to thrive in this post-COVID world that we live in now, and it's hard because it's like,
Well, I mean, the only thing, I mean, and I appreciate the sentiment, and I feel the same way. Like, I love you guys as well. But the only thing I kind of have a question about is what is post COVID? We're not post COVID yet.
no, yeah.
We're still in COVID.
Hmm.
So it's difficult, and we don't know. Like, some people are saying it's a 4-year pandemic. I mean, at the beginning of the pandemic, I went back and read all my books on plagues. Justinian's Flea and Daniel Defoe's a Journal of a Plague Year kind of thing. And I think history kind of repeats in a cyclical way,
It's
and
so
we're
true.
far from being out of the woods in terms of COVID. So I'm sorry to cut you off, but I just
No, no, no,
need to stress that point. Like, we can't get complacent on this.
no, definitely
We
not.
absolutely cannot. So
No, definitely not, definitely not. As we try to navigate this COVID world that we live in now, it's a bit difficult because we still have some people that we know passing away. We still have people who don't want to get vaccinated. I know from just personal anecdotal evidence, people that are friends of me on Instagram or just in real life, people that I know aren't getting vaccinated. Alex, I know you could speak on, tons of coworkers that you have that won't get vaccinated. When I was in the ER after I fell off the ladder, I was in Valley Stream out in Queens, Alex.
I used to live in Rosedale, which is
Oh,
like
okay,
right
okay.
next to Valley Street.
Yeah, so I'm in Valley. So Valley Stream ER. I'm in Valley Stream ER, and there was like 4 or 5 nurses discussing like if they're going to get vaccinated and when they're going to get vaccinated. I feel that if we are in this late in the game, there's no reason not to. Like, I understand people have certain fears and certain worries about it, but it's this there's nothing anymore. Like, you could look at the science. If you need to speak with your doctor, speak with your doctor on the issue. But it's in this lane of the game, there's no excuse.
Yeah, sorry, my cat's here. No, you should definitely get vaccinated. I think. Yeah,
well, if you
it's
can, I
just.
mean, but that's the thing. Like, where I am, there are no vaccines to go and get one.
Oh yeah,
That's
that's
the other
crazy.
thing. Like, we've now got this kind of global north, global south divide emerging again, where, you know, you've got Freedom Day in the UK because, you know, they've said, all right, well, you've had enough time to get vaccinated. If you haven't got vaccinated by now, that's your fault. But you know, where I am, and you know, where I am isn't so much of a thing to worry about because Australia is almost as big as the contiguous United States. It's a huge place, and we've got plenty of industry. We've got plenty of, you know, internal economy, so we can shut down the borders and get away with it. But if you're Fiji, if you're PNG, if you're Samoa, if you're American Samoa, if you're you know, some of the islands off Southeast Asia where you don't have vaccine and you rely on tourism, like Indonesia, what are you supposed to do? You know, and so w- I think that, and Hector, you and I were talking about this earlier about nationalism and how American foreign policy and American domestic policy are indistinguishable if you live outside the US, because that kind of like thing of only thinking the world revolves around America, um, you know, and the Olympics is on, and we were kind of thinking of it as in like the first dream team in Barcelona in 1992, and how that changed basketball, and how, you know, Jordan and Magic Johnson and the rest of them were able to just absolutely demolish the competition, and people still have that expectation about American basketball players in the Olympics when it's just not the case anymore. The rest of the world has caught up. The rest of the world watched what happened in 1992, and guess what? We're like nearly 30 years on from that point. Um, but I was making the point to you, Hector, that 1992 was also the first Olympics after the Berlin Wall fell.
Yeah.
And so that kind of nationalism of we are the greatest country on the planet. Look how many gold medals we won. No one can compete with us in sports, but it translates into politics. And,
Yeah.
There's a big meritocracy like at work, and even like I have an uncle. He's right wing, like awesome guy, but it's all about America. You know, like America's number one. We have to be number one, and I see that at work a lot. It's just like, yeah, I would love to be number one, but you know, let's be number one and lead the world in a humane direction, and a direction that serves us all, and not just the very top and a certain amount of people.
But it's hard to get that with like what Nick said. Like people are still stuck in that, and like you brought up America first mentality. It's like you remember, you know, after 9/11 happened, and the Yankees were in the World Series, and the Yankees were America's team at the time, and everyone was patriotic, and you had to have an American flag, and you know, which was understandable with the circumstances of 9/11. But it's all brainwashed because the Olympics was right after that, and the Olympics were the same thing.
Yeah, yeah. We just gotta.
A-Rod?
Huh?
Was A-Rod playing for the Yankees?
No. No. This was pre-A-Rod. This was 2001. Yeah. This was pre-Madonna A-Rod.
That's what it's
Yeah, but it's
But, you know,
it's
to bring it back around to Michael, like that was his thing, right? His thing was foreign policy, and that's what made his. And you know, I've been digging back through the archives and going back to like random clips from 7-8 years ago, and just trying to listen and just to hear like, what's the first appearance that we have documented of Michael Brooks on the Majority Report? And I don't know what it is, because there's like Matt and Michael have a similar laugh when it's off mic, and so it is a little bit hard to distinguish. Is that actually Michael? And then, you know, you get into the archives and it's like Michael's on camera, so it's like, all right, well, clearly this is, you know, where Michael is. But there's a couple of things that I thought were really interesting in that, and obviously more work needs to be done to really properly archive all his appearances, and I don't have the time or, you know, even just the computing space, the hard drive space to do it. But for now, YouTube is doing a reasonable enough job of keeping that alive for us. But one of the things was that
you guys hear that?
yeah, I think that's someone clicking their computer.
No, my bad. No, my phone. I'm sorry, my phone was ringing. I was just hoping it didn't like.
Oh no, we didn't hear that. We good.
My bad. I'm sorry. Go ahead. My bad.
So one of the things is like where Michael ended, right, with the Jacobin show, with TMBS being where it was, interviewing Lula. He didn't necessarily start there, and he didn't necessarily start with, at least in his appearances on the Majority Report, pushing a foreign policy narrative. Now we know he studied in Turkey, and he was always very well aware of a very kind of straightforward dynamic of political power and oppression. So we see that in his love for, say, the Black Panthers, but equally in his respect and admiration for the ANC. And I think those two things kind of combined together. And I guess where the mantle needs to be passed on, or what we need to kind of, and in our own small way, like no one's asking us to fill his shoes entirely, but in our own small way, is to take that sentiment that the left can win. Now, where does that land? And I think like last week we were kind of, Hector and I were talking about, you know, what a future possible show could look like. And we've been tinkering around the edges with like some kind of segments and things like that. But one of the things I think is interesting is to consider the ways in which um, the the real world situation is, and then what we can do in the future. So, like for me, it would be to say, okay, we've just come out of the Trump era, and I don't know about you, but I still feel that kind of like reverberal or reverberating anxiety of the Trump era, of like remembering just 6 months ago, 8 months ago, 9, 12 months ago, waking up every morning and wondering, what did he do? Like, how bad is it? Right.
Mhm.
And I don't know if you guys felt the same way, and if you felt that kind of sense. And Michael was a real lifeboat. Like, TMBS was a lifeboat in that era of like connecting some of the dots and
Yeah.
pointing out, and just relieving some of that anxiety in a way that, and it's no fault of the crew at MR, but because they're so immersed in the American political machine, and like truly, I mean, you have someone like Naomi Key Const on there, who is like in the conferences, who is talking to the lobbyists, who is working with the political campaigns, and really has an inside track, especially on New York politics, which, you know, New York politics is in a sense American politics in some ways, right? Like, who is Andrew Cuomo if he isn't the kind of exact enemy that we refuse to acknowledge we have on the left, right?
Yeah.
So that kind of thing. But Michael was able to take it to a different direction with his kind of connections to Brazil and Lula, especially, and La Java, what is it? La Chava Jato. How do you say car wash in Spanish, kind of thing.
Oh.
But but then also his acknowledgement of how these, like, the world of ideas works, right? And the meta game of these ideas. And so the first thing we need to do is to recognize what the reactionaries are reacting to, because it's not what we think it is, right? There's a superficial understanding of that, and there's a superficial understanding of like, and I love some more news, and I love Cody Johnson. I love what those guys have done, kind of post cracked, and how they've approached the kind of political sphere from a comedic angle and from a human and empathetic angle, and like fuck Wombo obviously, but everything else they do is fantastic. But the what they're always on that like superficial level, and necessarily so. That's how they make their money. But I think that what we need to recognize is that it goes much deeper than that. And what the reaction is, it, of people like your Murdoch press and the editorial line of a Murdoch newspaper or Fox or whatever you want to think of, is that young people are starting to um, break through the propaganda of the 60s, 70s, and 80s that
Mhm.
capitalism is the only system that is reasonable, fair, and equitable for everybody. And now we have this growing sentiment among younger people, especially, that is distinctly and definitively anti-capitalist. Now, to the extent that those young people will get on TikTok and readily say that is one thing, but when you're at the, DMV and you're talking to young people, well, you might not see it as readily. But from a capitalist point of view, it's the same as like they treat communism like epidemiologists treat the Delta variant. Like one person who claims to be a communist is potential to spread communism to everybody else. So you can't distinguish between one communist and 100,000 communists. It's the same threat to capitalism. So I think that's what we have to be very clear-eyed about. And I think we have to recognize that 2024 probably won't go the way that the three of us in this room right now, want it to go. And there's a very real risk that it will be an even greater threat to democracy around the world, because it won't be Trump. It might be a Josh Hawley or a Tom Cotton or a Tucker Carlson. But what Michael would want us to question is, okay, even from that starting point, right? If we are truly going to win, there must be a route from that dark place to winning. And we have to be able to see that route and walk it and guide other people behind us through that place so that we get to somewhere where we can have a sort of cosmopolitan socialism where we are ruthless with institutions and we do tear those institutions down without losing sight of being kind to people. And the ultimate question is whether or not you believe in redemption. So whether Trump can be redeemed, whether Rupert Murdoch can be redeemed, whether Tucker Carlson could be redeemed, right? And unless you're like willing to have a human empathy for those people, as vile as they are, then that if you're not willing to do that, then you're missing a key component to what this project was and continues to be.
Yeah, I believe that Michael had the unique ability to understand that people will not take in information if they can't relate to it. So we could speak and tell people like the history of America and how bad it was and the evils of capitalism and all that, blah blah blah. But if people don't see it in a day-to-day aspect, like Michael using Brazil as a perfect example to show people what's going on with Lula and stuff like that. Him highlighting, stuff issues with Thomas Sankara and what happened with that. So him bringing it down to the ground level so basic people can understand, like, no, it's not just in the past history, it's in the present history. Exploitation and neocolonialism is still going on till this day and it's not changing. When you look at Puerto Rico, when you look at the Caribbean islands and South America, and look what's going on in Cuba right now, like we can highlight like, evil dictatorships if people want to call them that, but you have to look at the root issue of what's causing the problem. It's the trade sanction, it's the embargo, and blah blah blah. And then when you look at South America, it's the same issues. When you look at North Korea, it's the same thing. And all these other countries are being squeezed by capitalism. So when you bring up kids nowadays, the generation that's being raised right now, the 16, 17, 18-year-olds of this day, they understand how to slice through the bullshit of the propaganda machine. I know we talked about that, but they know how to slice through the bullshit. When you have so much levels of income inequality in this country, when you have the poverty rate just growing, when you have homelessness, when you have access to medicine, young kids see that. And it's with technology, we can connect around the world. It's not the same when you and I were kids, we didn't have that technology, but as soon as we got it, that's when the quote unquote wokeness started happening with people our age. So the main issue is they don't want a masses of people being educated. So nowadays you have so many young people educated and connected and conversating and just trading ideas.
I really chat feature on Sonic the Hedgehog back on the Genesis, right?
Yeah. I really I feel like I'm still very new and I've been kind of out of the loop to politics recently because of my medic course. So I don't really know too much of what's going on right now. But what I always would go to Michael Brooks for was to find out about politics on the international level. And I love that about Michael Brooks because he was my international teacher. And I just knew mostly about American politics. I didn't know how, the world worked properly, but through him, I started learning. And what I appreciate about him was the way he could like bring it down in simplification form and explain to you like this is what's going on. Like what you were saying earlier, this stuff is still going on right now, not just in the past, and how history repeats itself. And I really like how he broke it down and made me understand it, because politics is a difficult. It's not just like intricate, and to understand it to like the average person, to make it understandable, it can be difficult. So I want to find a way to simplify it the way he did. And like if we bring up a name of somebody, like maybe have like something pop up with a brief like synopsis or bulletin point of like what that person does, like
A wiki profile.
yeah, like a mini wiki profile that people could quickly like, oh, that's who they're talking about, because we could mention the
That's what we
name.
need to do. It's like you've heard of you've heard of baseball cards, you've heard of basketball cards, you've even heard of Pokemon cards. But now we have the all-time
Right, exactly. Something like that would be
the stats on the back.
exactly. So what I'm saying,
Check
with
it
this,
out in our merch store. Link in bio.
yeah, right, yeah.
Yeah, coming soon.
So I believe like we gotta like educate people, because I'm still learning. So you just have little pop-ups of little like who this person, like you said, Cuomo, like who is Cuomo? What does he do?
He's a dirtbag.
Yeah, in the little card it should say like this is what he's about.
Yeah, but why is he a dirtbag is the question. Because he's appealing to a certain kind of demographic, obviously. Like he and it's not just that he's like, I don't want to speak out of time. I'm not from New York, so like we can speculate about his connections to, let's say, the business world, and understand what the New York business world is, and go back and watch the 7 seasons of The Sopranos or whatever it is to get that reference. But the idea being, like, he represents the triangulation that came after Reagan, which is of this kind of lib, right? And we're not libs. We see libs as being, in the Overton window, much further to the right than we want to be. And so the question, like, libs are trying to hold on to the kind of economic policies that were implemented through the Reagan era, or even before, through the end of the Carter era into the Reagan era. And it hasn't worked, right? We can't just snap our fingers and go back to Fordism or Taylorism. There's too many things that have changed in terms of the supply chain networks being super long compared to what they were 70 years ago. So, but the other thing to kind of think about is that Martin Luther King was born after Betty White and the Queen, right? Like, did you guys realize that? Like, he was born in the same year that Anne Frank was born, right? So this history is not so historic,
No.
right? Like the last slave who was born a slave, whose parents were slaves, died in 1956. That's when my mum was born. Right?
Same.
Like,
My mom was born in 56 also.
Yeah. So it's like that's not that long ago.
Nope.
That's like a couple of generations ago. We go back to that 1956.
when
Mao is running around in China. So it's like all these things are a lot closer to us than we do. It's like,
I think if we have those little like pop-up cards with these figures to explain to the audience like who these people are, I think the one major thing that should be in there, one major bulletin should be where the paper trail is. Like, who is their overlord? Is it this corporation, or is it this small?
We gonna have to get access to like IRS tax receipts and stuff in order to get that out.
Well,
and even with that, they can still hide it. But it's a good
like
good idea.
Something that's like, because I feel like that'll really clue you in.
Of course.
where
But
their
you know what,
mindset is.
you
Like
know
a
what you have to
Yelp.
be careful with that
Yeah.
though, and this is the thing. Like we've talked about this before. Is like we've all gone on our own political journeys to get here, and I don't think any of us in this room, maybe some people listening, but none of us in this room right now were there for the beginning of the Michael Brooks journey. I think we all kind of got on the bus once it was already pretty clear rocking party bus. So it's like, where did you come from before that? Like, you know, for me, when I think back to like 2017 and the meteoric rise of Jordan Peterson, and I was on board, you know, I bought into the Jordan Peterson thing, and it wasn't even Michael that got me out of that. It was actually I was friends with the publisher of Zero Books, Douglas Lane, and talking to him, and we were just, you know, because we went back to the Diet Soap days, if anyone remembers Diet Soap. And so I knew him from then, and he was like telling me all these like inside tracks about how dodgy Jordan Peterson was on an interpersonal level, and that just like really made me think like, what a fucking hypocrite this guy is. But maybe this is a good lead in to a clip. Are we able to play? I've put a link in the chat.
Yeah,
Are we
I'll
able to
bring
play
it
a
up
clip?
right about now. Share screen.
Just so we can have a laugh at Jordan Peterson and what
Oh
he's
yeah,
up
it's always a good to get a laugh. Jordan. You know, it was funny because when we had that open panel discussion and my friend Nice was came up board, you know, shout out to my guy Nice, and he brought up Jordan Peterson, and Nick was like, listen, if anybody can tell you Jordan Peterson is full of shit, I could be the person to tell you Jordan Peterson is full of shit. But let me know if you guys can hear the audio. All right, I'm about to put it on right now.
Yeah.
We good?
I can hear it, yeah.
Cody, who's this? Where you calling from?
Hello.
Hello.
This is Canada's premier polymath, Jordan Peterson.
Hello, Jordan.
I'm taking a break from masturbating in the bathroom at work to address some criticisms I've received on this program as of late. First off, you asked me why is my hair so greasy? Pomade and other hair products that result in a conspicuously slick sheen are reminders of a previous hierarchy in which men's hair could look like an orb and women could be groped in a hallway for dressing like whores. And again, I come back to makeup in the workplace. Why do women make their hair? Why do they put rouge on their cheeks? Why do they wear high heels? To exaggerate sexual attractiveness to their bosses. Pigs! Why do pigs have these cute little upturned noses? And why do they have those cute little curly tails above their pig buttocks? Why is it okay to openly talk about eating pig butt as a cut of meat? Yet if I were to tell my PA that I want to eat her big pig butt at work, she's black by the way, that's a problem. That's a problem. And don't get me started on the absurdity of outlawing daddy-daughter dances. The daddy-daughter dances and memories that I have would have been erased from my memory as some kind of Sam Harris computer fantasy in this legislation where it's passed. It's just absurd. And you ask me, why am I jerking off right now? Why am I jerking off? Why? To exaggerate my sexual attractiveness. Ritual bestiality with wine was common in previous hierarchies and social structures. They are very smart, very loving, very generous, loving animals.
Thank you for
Could you stop laughing? Clean your room, Michael. I'm your father. I'm your fucking cultural person.
That was a killer. There you go.
Oh my God.
I always hoped that he would call into the show.
Yep. That was.
Jesus Christ, that was fucking comedy. For the viewers that are watching and doesn't know the context, Jordan Peterson is a right-wing ideological daddy in the right-wing world, and he feels that Western society has fallen because the three of us here on this panel, we don't know how to clean our room. So in order for Western society to thrive and to live on, we have to be able to clean our room.
To be fair though, Hector, I spent this weekend trying to clean my room, like this room I'm in right now, and I was unable to do it. Like,
It looks pretty clean.
Wait, this is all backwards now. So like, anyway, there's these piles of books here, right? And I spent
But
all year trying to get those into the shelf. I can't. I gave up. And so it's
you
hard
gotta
to
get
clean
some.
your room.
You gotta get
It's
some.
hard to clean your room.
You gotta get some command hooks. I wanted to share this video that I found. It was a TikTok, basically explaining like CRT or like just like America in general, because like this basically explains the fragile mindset of like Americans.
Is this about my boy?
It's about your boy. Yeah, we're going over his history right now.
What's there to go over, bro? Like that's my boy. Like he's been killing it, bro. Like
Well, he took a shit on the floor.
oh, that bro, that was like so long ago,
No,
bro.
the thing is, like, he's been shitting on the floor. Is that
okay? So he shits on the floor every once in a while, like here and there.
we think it's like a systemic thing because like he mostly shits in the rooms of the computer science majors.
Okay, so you're gonna make this about major now? You're gonna make this about?
I'm not
you're trying to divide us by major because that makes you a big.
I'm not trying to divide anybody. I'm just saying maybe major plays a
My
role.
boy does not hate computer science majors. Okay, he used to, but he doesn't anymore. Okay, we fixed that. One of our frat presidents knew Python. How do you explain that?
That can still happen. That doesn't mean your boy didn't shit in his hard drive.
But do I have to feel guilty now? Because he didn't shit on my floor? Because I'm a theater major?
that's not
do I
what
have to
I'm-
apologize for
You don't
freaking
have to
loving my
You can
boy?
still support your boy. I'm just saying maybe we should also talk about how he shit on the floor.
We can talk about it. Just don't make me uncomfortable.
He did some uncomfortable things, so that might be.
Well, it's a rule now, okay? So if you say anything that makes me feel uncomfortable about my major or my boy, you're banned. Okay?
Well, that's such a vague rule, though. Like now, people might be scared to talk about anything bad that he's done.
So you're saying my boy's evil and I should hate myself?
If he's really your boy, you should want to talk about his problems so we can help him become better.
He doesn't have a problem.
That was funny. That was cool.
Well, but it's also
Stuff like that is effective, I think.
Yeah.
It certainly can be, but I also think there's you got to be able to follow through, and this is where it comes back to what I'm talking about. Like, what is what is critical race theory at the superficial level? Is like, okay, it's this law degree unit that if you're doing a law degree, you will have to study. And theories at that level are just tools, right? Like Hector, when you're up a ladder, you have a tool book. I hope that's not too soon to talk about you being up a ladder, but
Go ahead, it's good.
you have a tool belt on, right? And you don't just have one tool for every job, right? You need different tools to understand different jobs, and sometimes even on the same job, you need multiple tools to get it done. And so theories become tools, and whether those theories are critical theories or not is just a matter of branding, really. So Kimberly Crenshaw is probably the biggest name in terms of like intersectional theories and her work on what it means to be black and to be a woman. But you can go all the way back to someone like Donna Haraway in the 70s and her theory of situational knowledge, or Laura Mulvey, visual pleasures in the narrative cinema and the male gaze. So, these tools are just tools. So why make such a big deal out of critical race theory? It's not about critical race theory, right? It is about the kind of direction that a particular group of people in power want to take the US education system. And you have to understand, like, any education system is it's a polymer, right? It's amorphous. So you can't just like send down a directive like you can at Fox News in a memo to every staff member, and then Hannity gets it and Laura Ingraham gets it, and they're like, we've been telling you all along that COVID is very dangerous and you should get vaccinated, right? And then a segment later, it's like, but is the vaccine safe? Does it microchip you? Whatever it happens to be. But with the school system, you have to kind of do it at a more indirect way to steer that ship. And so there's a couple of things going on, and it's not just the right wing pushing critical race theory is bad and like white people shouldn't be racist. Like obviously, the biggest supporter of this anti-critical race theory thing is going to be someone like a Nick Fuentes, who is clearly a white nationalist and wants a white nationalist education for schools in America so that they can maintain that kind of false hierarchy, which brings us back to Jordan Peterson, and the idea that these Nordic Anglo-Saxon type white Caucasian people are just superior because of critical race science, where it's like, let's measure everyone's skull and work out who's smart, which is all nonsense and all bullshit, and doesn't take into account any kind of situational factors. But what it does do is it primes the pump for the kind of McCarthyist reactionary movement that we saw in the 1950s, and the kind of American education that our parents, the boomers, why are the boomers so notorious for their views? Well, it's because they went through school with every day being, is today the day the nuclear bomb goes off, right? You can imagine what kind of damage that did to you to be born in the 80s, the mid to late 80s, and never having to really consider that in a serious way, even though it was still a major threat. It wasn't existential. It'd be like how we think about climate change today, right? And then let's say in 50 years, the certain things have been put in place, and actually we were a little too worried about climate change. And actually, yes, it got pretty bad at one point there, but in the end, we pulled through, and the human species, the ingenuity of the survival mechanisms of the human species to survive, like, yeah, it got scary. There was some dark shadows on that long night walk, but we got through it, and we're better for it now. Fossil fuels are a thing of the past. And you just talk to your kids about how scared you were of climate change, they wouldn't have any frame of reference to really understand that. And so
Yeah.
we don't have the frame of reference to really understand what our parents went through in the 60s and 70s in terms of the Cold War. But that's what they're trying to do. And so on the one side, you've got the kind of, let's call it the Fox News contingent, who are pushing this, like, these scary words. Critical, that's a pretty scary word. Race, well, we know how scary the word race is in America, right? If you point out racism, you're being divisive, right? Why can't we all just sing kumbaya and get along? Well, yeah, don't mind the people who are being lynched in the back of the tree back there. Don't worry about that. Let's just sing kumbaya and get along now. And it's like, oh yeah, like, yeah, I stole your grandpa's house, but it's okay, you know. And then you got theory, and people are like, theory, oh, that's big brain stuff, and you put those all together. Critical race theory sounds really scary. But then on the other side of the spectrum, we've got the libs who are pushing this like America first policy in this new Cold War against China, right? And so we're going to end up getting the Green New Deal, but the Green New Deal is going to be in this like competitiveness on the world stage because China's pushing in that direction, whether America
Yeah.
wants to or not. So in the end, you put those two things together of needing to be competitive against China and needing to be reactionary against anti-capitalist theory or anti-capitalist sentiment, and you end up with this kind of in-between zone where you have this really, really nationalistic education policy, and that's how you steer the ship, right?
What's
So that's what we've got to be alert to when.
No, what I was gonna say is you hit it right on the head, and just to piggyback what Alex said a while ago is the misinformation and people not being educated. Because you said it, the CRT, critical race theory, is an advanced framework that is taught at a collegiate level. It's not taught in K through 12. It's not taught in public schools and stuff like that. No, this is an advanced course that is taught at advanced level, and you probably won't even get it in first year or second year college. You get that later on. All these
Well,
every
like, even if you did get it in first or second year, like,
yeah.
what is the comprehension level? Because,
No.
like, there's a certain thing of you can read this literature when you're 19, 20, 21, but you need a little bit of life experience to really be able to absorb the message of that literature.
Yeah.
So you're
No,
not
what I was
really
going
going to
to
get into your 25, 26, 27 anyway.
Yeah. And that's what I was going to say, because like every legislation that's being passed in Republican controlled states or cities, however you want to frame it, every piece of legislation, not one has critical race theory in it. They're saying that they're banning CRT to be taught, but if you look at the actual individual bill, there's not one reference to CRT. Every reference goes to the morality of the teachings. You know, they want teachers to teach the history, but from an unbiased perspective. So you can literally, like, if you break it down in Texas and the bill that was just passed in Texas, you can literally teach the history of the KKK, but you cannot teach that it was immorally wrong. Like,
That's crazy.
Right.
Hey, you guys. Unfortunately, I have to go.
oh, no problem, Brody.
I have a module tomorrow. It's like the boss level exams. But before I
You gotta
go,
work out what CPR is for a white person and what CPR is for a Hispanic person and what CPR is for a black person, and that's gonna take the whole night. So
I know. So I
Good to see
gotta. Yeah.
great to see you.
Thank you guys.
Love you, Alex, bro.
Love you guys both. I hope after November I'll be able to do this a lot more frequently. Until then, I'm kind of just stuck in this class.
Hey, no problem, bro.
Let me just show my shirt real quick. I found this in a flea market in Jersey. It's really cool. So yeah, it's a cool shirt. I can't wait to get back on here like all the time with you guys. I look forward to helping continue Michael Brooks' legacy. He was my international teacher, so I really want to learn more and continue that work. And I'm excited to go forth with you guys.
Just on that, like I know we're never going to get what we had in every Tuesday night listening to Michael Brooks, and that was something, you know, to cherish in the moment. But he did leave us with a pretty exhaustive list, and you know, so we can start to work our way through that. And you know, one of the
I would really like to
way through this book by Eric Hobsbawm, The Age of Capital. And so, you know, this is an amazing history right here, and this is volume 3 of 4. So there's a lot for us to do. But
yeah. And I really want to like make it simplified for the audience, because I know, like, you know, if I count like 10 friends, you know, like 9 of them are not gonna really understand politics. So I really want to be like a vessel of making this simplified for the audience, because it
that's where the sports stuff comes in.
Yeah,
that's true. It's true. Any which way to make it.
Michael too, right? Two Woke Bros was a sports show. Wozni is now a sports commentator. So, you know, we got to kind of, you know, it's the pedagogy of the press. We got to reach people where they are rather than expecting people to come up to where we are. You know?
Right. So yeah, that's what I want to.
Yeah. So we'll be able to get that, bro. Trust me, we'll get to there. That's why, you know, besides Comrade Corner, I am a co-host or one of the hosts for the Love of the Game. That's something that's a weekly sports show, and you know, I try to throw a little bit of seeds here and there and speak with dudes, but it's baby steps. You know, it's baby steps. You got to be able to like get people to understand. It's like all three of us, like Nick said, we had our own philosophical or political journeys in order to get to where we are right now. Like, you know, like we all started off, or Alex and myself, we started off as liberal kids who fell in love with Obama. Like, you know, Obama was going to be change. Obama was going to be hope.
Put my hand up for that too. Like,
yeah. So
when the day that Obama was elected, I was working in retail, and I happened to be working in an area of Victoria that had a lot of African people in it. Diaspora of African people, where, you know, they'd immigrated into the country, and specifically from South Sudan. And I just remember that day so vividly in my memory. It was November 9th, obviously, because I'm coming to you from the future. So, you know, I don't want to spoil it for you too much. But, you know, the amount of women who came in with tears in their eyes, and they weren't sad tears, they were tears of joy, because they saw just the symbolism of a black man being the president of the United States was just so refreshing after 8 years of war crimes that, yeah, it's like, you know, some of us are stuck in 1992 with the Dream Team just killing it in Barcelona. Some of us are stuck in 2008 with the symbolism of a black man breaking through after 8 years of war crime to become this eloquent and positive and just inspiring leader. And, you know, some of us, unfortunately, are still stuck in 2016 thinking like, it's all just this game with no consequences where all we have to do is piss off our political opponent to win. And we got to find a way to bridge all those together to come back to reality and to actually fight the battles that humanity as a whole is facing, not just Americans, not just the Chinese, not just the Africans, not just the Australians, but and the Africans being like not one group either. Like Ethiopia and Egypt are about to go to war over the Nile. So like, what are Kenyans supposed to do in that scenario? But we can talk about that another time. But it's just about understanding how these things are able to just kind of trap you in like the mosquito from Jurassic Park in the amber.
Yeah, that's a perfect
You can get
comparison,
locked in
bro.
it.
Yeah, I was getting to was that like we all started off there and was able to get here. It took us probably 10, 12 years in order to get here, when it comes to our mental thought process when it comes to politics, but we had to go through that in order to get to here. Like I hate to say it that we needed to have Trump in order to get the AOCs and stuff, even though there was people already suffering in the United States by liberal politics and liberal policies. I come from a place of privilege saying that we needed to have Trump in order to get everyone else that I mentioned, AOC, and even though Nina Turner was a senator before, but get her back in the forefront. I recognize that people, LGBTQ, indigenous people in this country have been suffering because of liberal policies and neoliberal policies. And when the mask is taken off, and yeah, you fall in love with like the liberal Obama kids. That's how I mentioned it. But then you're like, you know what? We want the democratic socialism that goes on in Europe, and you look at those policies and what they lead. And as you start investing more of your time into learning the thought process behind it, you recognize that that form of democratic socialism still counts on the exploitation of the global south. Then your mind frame starts working like, exploitation of other countries, that should not lead to my happiness. And you get to the point that we shouldn't even have that. Like Nick said, we have to be able to get to a place that is a neo cosmopolitan form of socialism for the new age, so workers can actually have rights in the workplace. Jeff Bezos he took a rocket ship to space, and everyone's talking about going into space and bringing industries into space. And I'm like, the earth is polluted as it is. You guys want to pollute space now? And on top of it, when people talk about space, the first thing that comes into my head is not space exploration, it's what's going to be the labor laws that happens in space? What's going to be like workers' rights in space? Like what's going to be
we're getting way too that's getting.
I gotta get going.
No. I'm just saying.
I wish I could talk, but I really gotta go. But I can't wait to get back here with you guys. After November, I'll be here. And
love you, Alex.
Love
you guys.
Baby.
Be safe. May the force be with you.
And also with you.
Thank you. All right, bye, you guys.
Later, bro.
So, Hector, just to pick up on the space thing, like I think that we're missing the forest for the trees with that. First of all, it's not space what Bezos did, or what Branson did, or what Musk is about to do. Like, it's it's not even low Earth orbit. And secondly, like in terms of the pollution side of it, we can make some comparisons between, obviously Bezos went to an awful lot of effort with the team that built Origin, the rocket, and what it does in terms of fossil fuels is very different to what Branson's rocket did in terms of fossil fuels. So, that's a tick, I guess, to Bezos, and I never want to give him a tick. I mean, the thing is, at the end of the day, he chose the shape of the rocket that most represented who he was as a person, and who his personality is. And it's kind of like, well, this is why we can't have billionaires. Because if he was just a 100 millionaire going through this midlife crisis that he's going through, he would have just bought a very fancy sports car, and that would have been it, right? Or he would have bought another house or the yacht or whatever. But because he's got this inordinate amount of wealth, he's able to buy this like phallic symbol dedication to his own ego and then come back, and after having this moment that he claims to have had, where he realizes how precious and fragile the earth is, he says, "I want to thank the Amazon customers, oh, and the workers, for paying for this, because you, the customers, oh, and the workers, pay for this, right? Like, hang on a second, the workers didn't fucking pay for this. You
Mm-hmm.
stole the money off the workers." And
Mm-hmm.
when we talk about, like, I heard someone put it this way: it's like people talk about Bezos as a billionaire is okay because he's a job creator, right? But then someone's like, okay, but tally up for me how many jobs were lost because Amazon came into a community, right? Tally up how many jobs were lost because Walmart came into a community. Any of these big box stores, like this consolidation and this trend towards monopoly does not create more jobs, right? It's like, how many jobs did GM create in 1970 versus how many jobs does Instagram create in 2021? It's just
Mm-hmm.
like there's a differential there, and it's like minus 30,000. So
Yeah.
30,000 people who had a job from this kind of behavior 50, 60 years ago no longer have a job by this kind of behavior in 2021. And so what we're ending up with is this growing hinterland. And so when it comes back to the point, which is, what are the reactionaries reacting to? And they're reacting to the sensitivity that young people are developing an anti capitalist sentiment. And they don't want that, because that challenges not just their wealth, but the system that produced their wealth, which means, it's a self interest thing to shut it down, right? It's a self interest thing to push critical race theory as a Trojan horse for pro capitalist propaganda.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason for that is because if you have an honest discussion about race in America, you cannot avoid slavery. And if you have an honest discussion about slavery and the legacy of slavery in America, and I'm not just talking about cotton fields, I'm talking about redlining, I'm talking about 13th Amendment, I'm talking about the prison industrial, um, the prison industrial complex, right?
Mm-hmm.
And, when you put all those things together and you say, okay, well, what is the foundation on which capitalism in America was laid? And capitalism in America is capitalism around the world, because America is the hegemon. I mean, you don't have to go further than Argentina and the Chicago school that put in Pinochet to
Mm-hmm.
understand how the Washington Consensus formed foreign policy for not just Latin America, but the Middle East, for Southeast Asia, for Australia, for UK and Europe. But it's also a dialectic, in the sense of, like, nothing ever just goes straight in a straight line, right? Like, it's
It's I
never as
just
simple as
one
that.
second. I'm sorry. I just want to clear something up because in the chat, people are saying they're a bit confused. What you got to understand is this spectrum that you speak of left and right, of liberal and conservative, they're basically the same thing. It's just one is a diet version of the other. Neoliberal policies is what we're speaking on. When you implement neoliberal policies, you have Biden coming out speaking on Cuba needs a chance in order to survive, while at the same time bumping up the trade sanctions and bumping up the embargo that is forcing Cuba to struggle as it is. We could point out that you could have evil people being in charge of a country, or have dictators doing evil things, while at the same time pointing out the trade sanctions and the embargo that the U.S. imposed on the country to make the conditions that the reason that they are. We just spoke on that. Exploitation is bad, no matter how you frame it. So if we're here in the United States, our happiness should not be on the back of the exploitation of workers in South America, of workers in Africa, of workers in the Caribbean. And that's what you need to understand, that this spectrum that you speak of when it comes to right, left, or conservative, liberals, if we were in like another country overseas, liberals would be conservatives. They wouldn't be on the left. They wouldn't even be considered on the left. So I apologize, Nick. You can continue. No, Cuba is not
Yeah, that's
struggling because of communism and the stubbornness of the dictator. Like you got to understand this trade embargo. No foreign companies, if you do business with Cuba cannot do business in America. If you're a ship, if you're a trade embargo ship, if you go to Cuba, you have to wait 6 to 10 months before you could come back in the United States. So please get all of the facts before you just spew out talking points that you've been
Yeah,
fed.
but I mean, it's not only that, right? It's like you could look at the Cuba America situation as being very similar dynamically as and in some ways in the reverse, but very similar in dynamics to Australia China, right? Like here you have Cuba, which is a small island that is south of this massive continent, right? North America, and the massive continent is saying, "Hey, we don't want to trade with you," right? Which then, what are your options if you're a Cuban after that, right? But not only that, I mean, if we're going to talk about Cuba, we're going to talk about what has happened in Cuba. I mean, I don't know necessarily enough about the contemporary situation, but I have a very clear memory of what Cuba did for Italy when Italy was going through the initial stages of COVID, and
Hmm.
how significant that was that Cuban doctors were able to go to Italy and help out with with stopping the spread of the infection. And that where did that come from? Why does Cuba have so many doctors, right? And why does Cuba have so many literate people, right? Like it's not necessarily
Why is
just
life expectancy in Cuba higher than it is in the United
yeah,
States?
I mean, people get upset when Obama said you didn't build that, right? But they misunderstood what he was talking about. And you can get on your high horse and talk about how, well, you didn't build that. You don't have a business, so you don't know what you're talking about. I mean, I've got von Mises on my bookshelf. I've read the Austrian economics, right? Like, I've got Milton Friedman's Capital, right?
Mhm.
But you know what else I have? I have Keynes' General Theory of Economics, and I wonder how many other people have bothered to read both arguments. Like
Mhm.
you can come at me with one flimsy argument all you like, but do you actually understand what you're talking about, or is this just slogans that you've heard that you've become triggered and now you just want to pump out all these reactive slogans to soothe your own ego? And it's like we don't have
Mhm.
time for that here. I'm sorry, but
Nah,
I mean, I don't have time for that here,
no,
let alone
absolutely
pretend
not. Me
to.
neither.
It's
Yeah.
like if you want to have a conversation about Cuba, let's have a realistic conversation about Cuba. And unfortunately, I am not in position to do that right now because I
Mhm.
don't know what is happening on the ground. But I do know that even good journalists have chosen to take an editorial line that is very much pro-capitalist. And when it comes down to that kind of nonsense of capitalist peoples versus communist peoples, you may as well be talking about Western peoples versus Oriental peoples in the in the conversations that were happening 200 years ago,
Mhm.
right? Like Oriental people aren't in history, right?
Mhm.
Because they haven't got the railway yet. It's like, okay, well, are they still people? Just because they can't ride a train, just because they're living an agrarian lifestyle, just because the remnants of feudalism haven't fully washed away from their communities and the village life that they live, and so it's different and you can't fully appreciate it. So, does that make them lesser human beings? Does
Mhm.
it make it lesser if they're from, Kenya or Nigeria or Chad or the Democratic Republic of Congo, or, are Mongolians lesser people because they come from Mongolia? Were the Kurdish women lesser people because they're Marxists and they're revolutionaries? Like,
Mhm.
give me a break. Give me a
It's
break.
like it's propaganda. It's just people just love to bootleg for the oppressor. It's we can literally point out and pinpoint every key and every actual fact, but people won't believe it. So it's like we're not here to debate people in the comment section or anything like that. It's just they just kept coming and commenting. So I just like let me just address this real quick. But we can continue just a conversation. My apologies, Nick. Didn't mean to get you
No,
flustered in any type of
that
way.
that's okay. That's okay. But it's true. It's like you gotta just be like, are we having a serious conversation? Like
Mhm.
when someone's just spamming the comment section, it's like, all right, well, we're a small show, and so it's disproportionate. Like, if a troll shows up or something, it's disproportionate. It's going to be
Yeah.
noticed. But at the end of the day, it's like this is a conversation between you and me,
Mhm.
and at the end of we're here, we're having this conversation. You're reacting to our conversation. So you're talking about we didn't build it. What are you talking about? Literally, we built Comrade's Corner, and you're here reacting to Comrade's Corner that we built. So I'm getting a little bit hot under the collar or whatever. But
Not even that, not even that. So to switch the conversation, like if you speak with people, like I have several conversations on Instagram and Twitter and stuff like that. But when you speak to people and they go to bat so hard for capitalism, and then you ask me, and then you ask them, what is capitalism? Are you a capitalist? And yeah, I'm a cap. Okay, how are you a capitalist? Do you own every building on this block? Are you able to control the rent in this area? Are you able to control the property value in this area? No, you are not a capitalist. You are just a consumer that has to work in a capitalist framework that we live in.
yeah,
That's all it
exactly.
is.
What is your cap? Show me your capital. Right? That first part of the word, capital. And
Yeah.
so, and then we get into it, and it's like, let's go back to the whole thing about like billionaires going into space. And it's like, oh, this is American exceptionalism. And it's like, you know what? It's time for American exceptionalism to come to an end, right? Like, I think to some extent, if we go back to the end of World War II, right, and there were some pretty grievous harms that were done across many different aspects of that conflict, and parts of it that are still lingering today. And if you think about Yemen as being the long shadow of World War One and World War II as a proxy war between Iran and Saudi Arabia, that is a grievous harm that has come from this kind of situation. And so, to some extent, the optimism that capitalism offered people, 1950s capitalism, and what that offered people. But let's break that down. What was that grand bargain, right? We're still in the immediate legacy of the New Deal from FDR. Right. And there were problems with that. And a part of the problems with that was race. Right.
Mhm.
So you come back around and it's still that issue. So, and then we can get to some of the other elements of it in terms of like the construction of Fordism at that time, and what was Fordism for the working people. And it was a situation where if you were 16, 17, 18 in say 1958, 1959, 1960, you could go into a factory, let's say a DuPont chemical plant or a GM plant or a steel plant, and you could come out there at age 65, 66, with a gold watch on your wrist and a house fully paid for, two cars fully paid for in the garage, and your kids have gone through college, and you still have a decent, you have a defined benefits pension and a decent living. And then we had this chip away at the union movement, and chip away at this and that to deregulate. Well, what is a regulation? It's just a rule, right? So Mark Cuban gets on and starts talking about we need to regulate this really niche specific thing when he loses money, and no one bats an eyelid at that. But you start talking about regulating EPA laws, and everyone's like, "Oh, you can't do that; it'll hurt capitalism." And it's like, so wait, we have to have, if the billionaires ask for a rule, we have to give them a rule, right? We have to do what they say. But if the people ask for a rule, no, that'll hurt capital. That'll hurt our competitiveness, right? So if we can't dump toxic waste into the waterways of Michigan that set Lake Michigan on fire, well, and I mean, it's the opposite way around, right? It was more that they stopped using that pristine water and turn the switch and Snyder and all that. I mean, like, you know, it's important to think about like the dialectic here and the fact that you've got these two forces at any given time in history, right? It's personality precedes ideology. So if you're the type of person who needs that kind of hyper regulation in terms of like the authoritarian mindset that Corey Robin talks about, right? And you go through, you're going to find yourself aligned with fascism, whether it's defined or undefined. Whereas if you're the type of personality that thinks that, first and foremost, there should be equality, whatever that means. So, if someone comes around for dinner unexpectedly, everyone gets a smaller portion, but everyone gets to eat, right? Then you're going to find yourself when you come down the line and start to identify your ideology, you're going to be on the side of communism. Broadly speaking, I'm just giving you two kind
Yeah,
of
yeah, yeah.
buckets here, right? But the reason I'm giving you those two buckets is like it struck me when I was walking through the concentration camp in Dachau, like how quickly this can happen, right? We think of World War II as being this ancient thing that was over 70 years ago and never again unless we forget and all of that, right? But you know, 1933, Hitler comes to power following, the whole situation with the Weimar Germany and hyperinflation and this and that and the other. And it's this compromise, and it's the unification of a strong leader to come in and bring the parliament back together, and we're going to be able to govern Germany finally as one continuous force. And of course, we know what the rest of the story was. But you look at what happened in Auschwitz and Dachau in 1933, especially Dachau in 1933, and how quickly that happened. And it wasn't the Jews who were in there first. It was the gays, it was the disabled, it was the communists, it was the progressives, broadly speaking, it was the journalists who were talking about what he was doing, right? So it happens quick and it will
Mhm.
take you by surprise. It's kind of like, to bring it back to a sports metaphor, you go into the end of the third quarter, you're 16 points up, right? And you feel like you've got the game on your terms. You feel like you've got the plays are working, right? And then all of a sudden they get 4 plays in a row and now it's only an 8-point margin. Like it can happen real quick. And so you've always got to be defensively minded, right? If you're coming from the position we're coming from. And equally if you're on the other side, if you're on the flip side, right? Whether you want to acknowledge the label as you want to use the term capitalist or libertarian or whatever, right? But what do you actually stand for at the end? Chaos, anarchy. Like whoever has the money and the power can hire whoever they want. Why? Do you have I don't think there's billionaires tuning into our show, Hector, somehow. Like I don't think this person is tuning in. I mean, maybe it's a Russian bot or something. I don't know. But it's the point at the end of it is like, why are you defending this particular system? You have to ask yourself that question: is what do you hope to get out of it? What is the aspiration, right? And it's that maybe one day you yourself will be worth that kind of $1 million, $100 million, $1 billion, right? But it's very unlikely. It's much more likely that you're going to end up homeless than you are to become a billionaire. So that's just like this kind of selfish attitude that I think COVID has really like cast that, like Trump beforehand, but I think you get away with it before COVID with Trump because Trump was funny, right? That's what people said, like, oh, he's funny, right? But once the bodies start piling up, it's like it's not
It's
the
not funny
humor
anymore.
is not landing anymore. So that's where I think it comes down those dividing lines,
Hold
and
on,
so we always have to be cognizant of the dialectic in that sense. Um, but I think I don't know, like I think we're getting probably towards the end of it, and I think look, Michael says, "Be ruthless with institutions, be kind to people." And that's the message we should carry through our lives. And my question is whether or not you believe in redemption. And to make that argument, to fully determine whether you believe in redemption or not, you have to be able to separate a person from their behavior and to be forgiving if a person is willing to change their behavior, right?
hmm
So and this was something else that Michael said in the build up to the 2020 election. It was like, I don't care where you were in 2016. If you were wearing a MAGA hat and waving an American flag in 2016, if you're voting Bernie in 2020, I want you on my coalition, right? And so that's how we have to be thinking, is like people can change.
hmm
People can change.
No,
The
definitely. And
hardest thing with that is to be able to loosen the shackles of the habitual kind of ecosystem, whether it's media, whether it's friends, whether it's family, whether it's what you're reading, whether it's your job, right? You have to be brave to change, and you have to be brave to find that redemption arc through which you can, you know, alter your behavior. And, that's a challenge for everybody.
No, yeah, definitely, and I agree 100% with that sentiment. You know, and on the other, and just oppositely, like you said, redemption is something that we have to be able to have towards people. But at the same time, is if you were saying problematic stuff before or had a problematic viewpoint, if marginalized people don't want to have interactions with you, but are fine with you voting on the same platform and stuff like that, that's cool as well. As long as you see your wrongs and don't automatically think, well, I'm gonna vote for Bernie, so I'm forgiven. No, you have to be able to do the work and understand your faults and why they were wrong and your viewpoints. But 100% agree with you that we have to be able to let people, how can I say, repent if we want to use that word.
Well, we have a metaphor in Australia, right? And this, one of the biggest issues we have in Australia is sexual assault and sexual harassment. And, women are dying every single week at the hands of their partners, essentially, right? And it's catastrophic, right? You can't have 1 to 12 women a week die because they're in a relationship, a heteronormative relationship. So that requires a systemic change among the mindset of young men, right? What are the boundaries? Because the boundaries that our fathers had and the boundaries that our fathers taught us are completely inappropriate and wrong, right? So we need to erect new boundaries. And one of the metaphors we have to try and break through that is like, Hector, I've got 6 glasses here, all filled with liquid, and you can choose any of them. Now, 5 of them have apple juice in it. One of them doesn't have apple juice. One of them I pissed in. Now, they all look the same, right? You can't see a difference in coloration or smell or anything, right? So you're just gonna have to pick one and hope for the best. How confident are you that you're gonna get apple juice and not piss? And how likely are you to pick a glass and say, yeah, sure, 5 out of 6, that's pretty good odds, right? You don't want to drink the piss.
Yeah.
You know what I
Yeah.
mean? It was like, so that's the kind of thing, like, in the end, like, you have to recognize that your shitty behavior, and we all have shitty behavior, right? And we all have to deal with that. And that's a part of growing up. That's a part of being an adult,
Yeah.
right? And it's really hard when you look back and you see, like, the previous generations had fought so hard to put these structures in place so that it was just that little bit easier to be an adult. And now, at the same time, they got the benefit of that, and now they want to erase it all so that they can get, financially more secure. Like, I heard someone say something like, what was it? It's like, when you're a kid and your parents said, "I'll give you something to cry about," and it wasn't about them hitting you. It was about 30 years later looking back and realizing they'd tanked the housing market, they'd destroyed pensions, and brought about the end of the ecological collapse. I was like, oh, holy shit. Yeah, you really did give me something to cry about. So
Yeah.
maybe we
Yeah.
can end on that note, but it's like something to think about,
Of course, of course. Yeah, we could definitely end on that note. And also as well, people, me being living in New York City, climate change is real. There's parts of Far Rockaway that is people can't live in anymore because of Hurricane Sandy that happened several years ago. Let's see, and Washington State, I think a month ago, they had a heat. They broke the heat index record in the U.S. at 116 degrees in Washington State, to the point that it was melting the sides of people's homes. It was 4 to 6 degrees off of being to the point that it's considered lethal for people to be in temperatures of 122 degrees. But hey, you know what? Like Ben Shabibo said, just sell your house if if the water level rises. Just sell your homes. Love you, Nick. Thank you everybody for tuning in, and love the trolls in the chat. Even though you guys were trolls, you guys still gave us views, so appreciate you for that. And like always, guys, peace, love, sports, and wrestling. Laters.